Marcus stood in the hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, a cup of terrible coffee cooling in his hands. At 46, he'd spent more time in hospitals than he cared to remember, but it never got easier. The fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the sound of hushed conversations and distant machines beeping. All of it brought back memories he'd rather leave buried. His brother Daniel was in surgery, the doctors working to repair damage from a car accident that had happened 6 hours ago. Marcus had been the emergency contact, the call coming just as he was finishing his shift at the construction site. He'd driven straight here, still in his work clothes, dust and concrete still clinging to his boots. The waiting room was mostly empty at this hour. A few scattered people dozed in uncomfortable chairs, an elderly man reading a Bible, a young couple huddled together in worried silence. And in the corner a woman sat alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red from crying. Before moving forward, if this story reminds you of the power of showing up for strangers, of refusing to let others face crisis alone, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below about a time when a stranger's kindness helped you through a difficult moment, or when you chose to sit with someone in their fear. Your story might inspire someone else to be the person who waits with a stranger so they don't have to be alone. She was perhaps in her early 40s, dressed in business casual clothing that suggested she'd come straight from work like he had. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose, and she held a tissue she occasionally pressed to her eyes. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the doors where the doctors emerged with updates, her whole body tensing with hope and fear. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself many times over the years, when his father had his first heart attack, when his mother had her stroke, when his ex-wife had been in the accident that had, ironically, nothing to do with why their marriage ended, but everything to do with why he'd learned to sit quietly in waiting rooms, managing fear. The woman checked her phone again, then set it down with a shaking hand. A sob escaped her, quickly stifled, and she pressed the tissue to her mouth as if she could push the fear back inside. Marcus made a decision. He picked up his coffee and walked over to her section of the waiting room, taking a seat 2 chairs away. Close enough to acknowledge her presence, far enough to respect her space. "First time?" he asked quietly. She looked up, startled, her eyes wary. "Excuse me?" "First time doing the hospital waiting room thing. I can always tell. You look like you're trying to hold yourself together by force of will alone." She laughed, a broken sound. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been here before." Marcus gestured to his coffee. "The coffee is terrible, but it's something to hold on to. Gives your hands a purpose when you feel completely useless. I don't drink coffee this late. I'll never sleep. You weren't going to sleep anyway. Trust me on that one." She was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to the coffee station in the corner. When she returned with her own cup, she sat 1 chair closer to Marcus. "I'm Diane." "Marcus, who are you here for?" "My daughter, Emily. She's 16. There was an accident at a soccer game. Another player collided with her and she hit her head. They're doing scans, checking for bleeding, making sure there's no skull fracture." Her voice broke on the last words. "She was unconscious when they brought her in. She didn't recognize me." Marcus felt the familiar ache of empathy. "That must be terrifying. I keep thinking about all the times I was annoyed with her this week. She forgot to take out the trash. She was on her phone during dinner. She rolled her eyes when I asked about her homework. And now all I can think is, please, let her be okay so she can roll her eyes at me again. I'll never complain about anything ever again if she's just okay." "You'll complain again," Marcus said gently. "If she's okay, and I believe she will be, you'll eventually get annoyed about the trash and the phone and the eye-rolling. That's what it means to be a parent. The fear doesn't make the annoying things stop being annoying. It just reminds you that the annoying things are a privilege. Diane looked at him with surprise. You have kids? Had. A daughter. She'd be 32 now if she'd lived. The past tense hung between them. Diane's hand went to her mouth. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have. You didn't know, and it's okay to talk about it. She was 17. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly, which the doctors assured me meant she didn't suffer. As if that makes it easier. How do you survive something like that? Marcus took a sip of his terrible coffee, considering. You don't, really. You just learn to carry. Some days are heavier than others, but you keep going because that's what you do. And you show up in hospital waiting rooms for your brother's car accident surgery, and you sit with strangers who are terrified because you remember what it felt like to be that terrified and alone. Is that why you came over here? Because you could tell I was scared? That, and because no one should have to do this alone. Where's Emily's father? Diane's expression hardened. He left 5 years ago, decided he wanted a different life, one without the responsibility of a teenage daughter and a wife who worked too much. He lives in California now with his new family. I called him when the ambulance took Emily, and he said he'd try to get a flight, but it might take a day or two. As if she can just wait to have a medical emergency until it's convenient for him. So you're doing this alone. I'm always doing it alone. Single parent, full-time job, trying to be everything she needs. Some days I feel like I'm failing at all of it. But you're here, in the middle of the night, drinking terrible coffee, holding yourself together with pure determination. That's not failing. That's showing up, which is the most important part of parenting. They fell into a comfortable silence, two strangers united by fear and fluorescent lighting. Around them, the hospital continued its endless rhythm. Doctors moving between rooms, nurses checking charts, other families in their own private crises. An hour passed. Diane's phone rang and she jumped, but it was just a friend checking in. Marcus could hear her trying to sound braver than she felt, assuring the friend she was fine, that Emily would be fine, that everything would be okay. When she hung up, her composure cracked. What if I'm lying? What if everything isn't okay? What if this is the night that changes everything? Marcus set down his coffee and turned to face her directly. Then you'll survive it. Not because you're strong or brave or any of. Those words people throw around that don't mean much when you're drowning. You'll survive it because you don't have a choice. Because Emily needs you to, whether she's okay or not. How did you do it after your daughter? Badly at first. I drank too much, pushed everyone away, quit my job, basically tried to die without actually having the courage to do it. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, recounting history without emotion. Then one day my brother, the one who's in surgery right now, showed up at my apartment. He dragged me out of bed, made me shower, and put me to work on a construction crew. Said I could hate the world, but I wasn't allowed to waste the life his niece would have given anything to have. That's harsh. That's love. The honest kind that doesn't let you drown even when drowning feels easier than swimming. Another hour crawled by. Marcus told Diane about his brother, about the construction business they'd built together, about learning to find purpose in physical work and simple routines. Diane told him about Emily, about raising a daughter alone, about the terror and joy of watching your child become their own person. She wants to be a doctor, Diane said with a sad smile. She volunteers at the animal shelter and cries over injured birds, and lectures me about eating too much processed food. She's this perfect combination of compassionate and bossy, and I don't know where she got either trait because I'm neither of those things. You're here in the middle of the night drinking coffee you don't want, holding yourself together for her. That's compassion. And you raised a daughter who wants to help people and stands up for what she believes in. That's good parenting. What if I don't get to see who she becomes? What if tonight is all we get? Marcus reached over and took her hand, a gesture that was somehow both familiar and appropriate. "Then you'll have loved her perfectly for 16 years, which is more than some people get in a lifetime. But I don't think that's how tonight ends. I think Emily is going to be fine, and you're going to drive her home tomorrow, and she's going to be annoyed that you're being overprotective, and life will go on being beautifully ordinary." At 3:30 in the morning, a doctor emerged through the doors. "Family of Emily Patterson?" Diane stood so quickly she nearly spilled her coffee. Marcus stood with her, a supportive presence without being intrusive. "I'm her mother." "How is she?" "She's going to be fine. The scans show a mild concussion, but no bleeding, no fracture. We're keeping her overnight for observation, but she's awake and asking for you. She's going to have a headache for a few days, and she'll need to rest, but she'll make a full recovery." Diane's knees buckled slightly, and Marcus caught her elbow. She turned to him with tears streaming down her face, this time from relief instead of fear. "She's okay. She's asking for me. Go. Be with her." Diane hugged him, quick and fierce. "Thank you for waiting with me, for not letting me fall apart alone. That's what people do. We show up for each other, even when we're strangers." Diane followed the doctor through the doors, and Marcus returned to his seat. His own weight continued, but somehow it felt lighter now. Maybe because he'd helped someone else through their fear. Maybe because being useful reminded him that surviving tragedy didn't mean retreating from the world. An hour later, his own doctor appeared with news that Daniel's surgery had gone well, that his brother would recover, that the worst was over. Marcus felt the familiar wash of relief, the way fear slowly loosens its grip when crisis passes. As dawn began to lighten the windows, Marcus left the hospital and found Diane in the parking lot, sitting in her car with her head on the steering wheel. "Hey," he said, tapping on her window. "You okay?" She rolled down the window, her face exhausted but peaceful. "I'm fine. Just needed a minute before I go back up. They're moving her to a room, and I wanted to sit with the relief before I shift back into mom mode." "That makes sense. Can I give you some advice from someone who's been through loss?" "Please. Go home at some point today. Shower, change clothes, eat a real meal. Emily needs you healthy and present, not martyring yourself by her bedside. You can't take care of her if you don't take care of yourself. Is that what your brother told you, when he dragged you out of bed? That's what I learned the hard way. The people we love need us functional more than they need us self-sacrificing." Diane nodded slowly. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for sitting with me, for not letting me spiral, for sharing your story even though it must hurt to talk about. It does hurt. But hurt shared is hurt divided, or something like that. And maybe that's the point of all this. We can't prevent bad things from happening, but we can refuse to let each other face them alone." They exchanged numbers, a gesture that felt both natural and surprising. Over the next few weeks they checked in on each other. Diane sent updates about Emily's recovery, her daughter's frustration with mandatory rest, her relief at watching normal teenage annoyance return. Marcus sent updates about Daniel's physical therapy, the slow progress toward recovery, the way crisis had reminded them they were brothers before they were business partners. 3 months later, Diane invited Marcus to Emily's soccer game, the first she'd been cleared to play since the accident. He sat in the stands next to Diane, watching a 16-year-old girl who didn't know him play with joy and determination. "She doesn't remember much about that night," Diane said quietly. "The concussion affected her memory. But I told her about you, about the stranger who waited with her scared mother so she wouldn't be alone." "What did she say?" "She said the world needs more people who show up for strangers. That kindness to people we don't know is the most important kind because there's nothing in it for us except the chance to be decent." Smart kid. She wants to meet you, to thank the man who took care of her mother. After the game, Emily walked over, still in her uniform, her face flushed with victory. She was tall and confident, with her mother's eyes and a handshake that reminded Marcus of his own daughter at that age. "Mom says you saved her life that night," Emily said directly. "I wanted to say thank you. I didn't save anyone. I just sat in a waiting room and drank bad coffee." "That's not what Mom says. She says you kept her from falling apart, that you knew exactly what to say because you'd been through worse and survived. That's a kind of saving." Marcus felt his eyes sting. "Well, your mother is very kind, and very strong. You should know that. I do know. But it's nice that someone else sees it too." Over the years that followed, Marcus and Diane built an unexpected friendship. He came to Emily's games and graduation, met the daughter he'd helped save without ever intending to. Diane came to Daniel's wedding, meeting the brother whose surgery had put Marcus in that waiting room on that particular night. They never dated, never became more than friends, but the bond forged in that hospital waiting room remained strong. They were each other's emergency contact, the person they called when they needed someone who understood what it meant to survive fear, to show up even when showing up was hard. "Do you ever think about that night?" Diane asked him years later, at Emily's medical school graduation. "How random it was that you happened to be there, that you chose to sit with a stranger instead of staying lost in your own worry. I think about it all the time. How one choice, one moment of deciding not to let someone be alone, changed both our lives." "I got to watch your daughter grow up, Diane. After losing mine, I got to witness someone else's child become the person she was meant to be. That's not random. That's grace." Emily says that when she's a doctor, she's going to remember that healing isn't just medical. It's sitting with people in their fear, making sure they're not alone in the hardest moments. She learned that from you. No, she learned it from you. From a stranger who showed up when he didn't have to. Marcus watched Emily across the crowd, surrounded by friends and family, her whole life ahead of her. He thought about his own daughter, about all the milestones he'd missed, all the moments he'd never witness. The loss would never stop hurting. But sitting here watching this young woman who'd survived and thrived, who was becoming a healer because someone had shown her mother kindness in a waiting room, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of meaning. The understanding that showing up for others, especially strangers in their darkest hours, was how we honored those we'd lost. How we turned tragedy into testimony, pain into purpose, loss into love that extended beyond our immediate circle. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is refuse to let someone face fear alone. Sometimes sitting with a stranger for a few hours in a hospital waiting room changes the trajectory of multiple lives. And sometimes the people we help in their darkest moment become the people who help us remember why survival matters, why showing up matters, why choosing connection over isolation is always the right choice.